The asylum loomed, a jagged silhouette against the bruised sky. Craggy teeth of broken windows like a mouth poised to swallow the moon. It had stood there for a century, a monument to madness, forgotten. Wind howled through the crumbling edifice, a mournful, lonely sound. The rusted gates groaned, a warning. Inside, shadows stirred in the dust-choked silence, always waiting. 4 friends stood at the foot of the hill, drawn by morbid curiosity and youthful bravado. Mark, the self-proclaimed leader, grinned, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Ready for a night we'll never forget?" "Maybe we should rethink this," whispered Sarah, clutching her boyfriend David's arm. He patted her hand reassuringly, his gaze fixed on the asylum. Only Emily seemed unfazed, her camera already clicking, documenting their descent into darkness. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay and something else. Something heavy, oppressive. Each footstep echoed in the cavernous halls. Walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, now peeled and stained. They passed a room filled with rusted beds, restraints dangling beside them. The air grew colder. Mark shivered, his bravado fading. "This place is creepy," he muttered. No one disagreed. A low moan echoed from the end of the corridor. They froze, hearts pounding. "Just the wind," David said, his voice tight. But the sound came again, a drawn-out wail filled with an unspeakable sadness. Emily, captivated, moved towards the sound. "Wait," hissed Sarah, but Emily was already gone, swallowed by the shadows. A cold wind swept through the hallway, extinguishing their only light. Then silence, thick, heavy, and absolute. Panic swelled in the suffocating darkness. "Emily!" Mark's voice cracked as he called out, his heart pounding in his chest. The forest seemed to close in around him, every shadow a potential threat. He could barely see a few feet ahead, the dense trees and underbrush creating a labyrinth of fear. A cold hand brushed against Sarah's cheek, and she screamed. Her voice echoed through the trees, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had surrounded them moments before. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. A shape coalesced in the darkness ahead, vaguely human but impossibly tall and thin. It moved with an unnatural grace, its limbs elongated and twisted. The figure seemed to absorb the light around it, creating an aura of darkness that was almost palpable. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, internal light. They pierced through the darkness, locking onto Sarah and Mark with an intensity that made their blood run cold. The eyes seemed to hold a malevolent intelligence, as if the entity was studying them, deciding their fate. The entity drifted towards them, its mournful wail intensifying. The sound was otherworldly, a mix of sorrow and rage that sent shivers down their spines. It was as if the very air around them vibrated with the entity's anguish. David pushed Sarah behind him, his fear tangible. He could feel the entity's cold presence pressing in on them, suffocating and relentless. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but the forest seemed to conspire against them, every path leading deeper into darkness. "We have to get out of here," he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. The urgency in his voice was clear, but the forest offered no escape. Every direction seemed fraught with danger, the entity's presence growing stronger with each passing second. But the entity was closing in, its icy aura enveloping them. The temperature dropped sharply, their breath visible in the frigid air. The entity's wail grew louder, more insistent, as if it was drawing strength from their fear. They could feel its malevolent energy wrapping around them, pulling them into the abyss. They ran, stumbling through the darkness, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding in their chests. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches clawing at their clothes and faces. Every step was a struggle, the uneven ground threatening to trip them at any moment. The entity's wails echoing behind them, a haunting reminder of the danger that pursued them. The fog thickened, making it harder to see, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. Panic set in, as they realized they were not alone in the mist. Doors slammed shut, barring their escape. Each door that closed behind them felt like another nail in their coffin, sealing their fate. The sound of metal clanging echoed through the empty halls, a grim reminder of their entrapment. The air grew colder, biting at their skin. Their breaths became visible in the frigid air, each exhale a puff of white mist. The cold seeped into their bones, making every movement painful and slow. They huddled together for warmth, but it was little comfort against the encroaching chill. They were trapped, hunted in the labyrinthine halls of the asylum. The walls seemed to shift and change, leading them in circles. Every turn brought them back to where they started, the sense of hopelessness growing with each step. The asylum was a maze, designed to confuse and trap its victims. Mark tripped, falling to the cold stone floor. His hands scraped against the rough surface, drawing blood. He tried to get up, but his legs felt like lead. The fear was paralyzing, making it hard to think or move. He could hear the others calling his name, but their voices seemed distant and muffled. He looked back, his eyes wide with terror. The entity was closer now, its form barely visible in the darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding over the ground. Mark's heart raced as he realized there was no escape. The entity was upon him, its presence overwhelming and suffocating. "It's got me!" he screamed as the entity descended on him, its cold, clammy hands wrapping around his body. The sensation was like being submerged in ice water, every nerve ending screaming in agony. He struggled, but the entity's grip was unbreakable, its form merging with his, a dark shadow enveloping him completely. He could feel his consciousness slipping away, the world around him fading to black. The entity was consuming him, body and soul, leaving nothing behind. His screams were cut short, replaced by a chilling silence. The forest grew still, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. The others could only watch in horror, knowing that they were next. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. Sarah and David pressed on, their hope dwindling with each passing moment. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees whispering secrets of despair. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was trying to pull them into the abyss. The path ahead was barely visible, shrouded in shadows that danced menacingly in the dim light. They had been walking for hours, their energy sapped by the oppressive atmosphere. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. They clung to each other, drawing strength from their shared determination to find a way out of this nightmare. Just when they thought all was lost, they saw it. A glimmer, a spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Their hearts quickened, a surge of adrenaline propelling them forward. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement to investigate the source of the light. It was their only chance, their only hope of escape. A faint light emanating from a room at the end of the hall. It flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The light was a beacon, guiding them through the darkness. They moved cautiously, aware that the light could be a trap, but unable to resist its pull. The closer they got, the more they could see. The room was old, abandoned, but the light was steady, unwavering, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. They didn't hesitate. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The light grew brighter, more inviting. It was as if the darkness was being pushed back, retreating in the face of their determination. They reached the doorway, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The light was warm, comforting, a stark contrast to the cold, unfeeling darkness that surrounded them. They burst through the door and slammed it shut, the entity's wails echoing on the other side. The sound was chilling, a reminder of the danger they had narrowly escaped. They leaned against the door, their bodies trembling with relief and fear. The room was small, but it felt like a sanctuary, a safe haven from the horrors outside. They were safe for now. The room offered a brief respite, a moment to catch their breath and gather their thoughts. They knew they couldn't stay there forever, but for now it was enough. They looked around, taking in their surroundings. The room was sparsely furnished, but it was clean, a stark contrast to the decay outside. They felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that they might just make it out alive. But the asylum held them captive, its darkness a constant threat. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. They could feel the presence of the entity lurking just beyond the door, waiting for its chance to strike. The asylum was a labyrinth, a maze of corridors and rooms that seemed to go on forever. They knew they had to keep moving to find a way out before the darkness consumed them. The haunting was far from over. The asylum was alive, a malevolent force that fed on their fear. They could feel its eyes on them, watching, waiting. They steeled themselves, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. They had come this far, and they weren't about to give up now. The light had given them hope, a reason to keep fighting. They took a deep breath, their resolve strengthening. The battle was far from over, but they were ready.